Hi, welcome back, and in this video I want to talk about Fujifilm cameras, but not modern not modern Fujifilm cameras. Now, modern Fujifilm cameras are almost undeniably cool and very popular. They hold their resale and residual values incredibly well. Some of the more compact ones, even the fixed lens ones, doing so. Demand for them skyrockets. Fuji on a number of occasions have had to close order books, etc., etc. And their products run the gamut from what are effectively extremely good point-and-shoot cameras right the way through to highly regarded medium format digital bodies as well. And that's the state of Fuji and their much lauded, and based on what I've seen for very good reason, film simulations. So Fujifilm right now in 2024 is very cool, and their products are highly desired. That, however, was not always the case for Fujifilm. There was a time when Fujifilm in the 2000s was anything but cool, and it's one of those camera series that I want to talk about today. Now, it was Fuji's first foray into the digital SLR field with their S Pro series. Now, this ran across four cameras: the S1, S2, S3 and S5 Pro. Now, I've had direct experience having owned and shot an awful lot with two of those cameras, namely the S3 and the S2, the slightly older version, and it's those two I want to talk about. I don't have any real experience with the S1 and I don't have any real experience with the S5 Pro, so I'm going to stick with what I know and talk about, which is the S2 and the S3. Now, both of the S2s and the S3s were based on a Nikon body and took Nikon mount lenses, which made them quite approachable. Now, the body they were actually both based on is the Nikon F80, which some of you who may not be familiar with these particular DSLRs but are familiar with Nikon's product may think, hold on a second, the F8 is a 35mm film camera, and you absolutely would be right there. What Fuji effectively did was take a 35mm Nikon body, the F80, and ram a digital sensor on it and a digital pack, which very much made it a camera of two halves. Now, this was extremely visible on the S2 Pro because the S2 had a annoying feature, which was that it took two different power sources. So you had a battery tray underneath it, which you fed in four AA batteries, but then in the hand grip it required two CR123 batteries, so a total of 6 volts lithium, with one side powering the camera and the other side powering the digital element of it. Now, I no longer have my S2 Pro. It suffered an unfortunate accident involving my clumsiness, a near two-storey window and a drop onto a paved floor. It did not survive, unfortunately. The good news is, however, that the insurance claim for it did end up furnishing me with my Nikon D7000, which was great news for my perspective. But I do still own a Fujifilm camera. I own this one. This was gifted to me by my father and my stepmother, and was used by them for a while before they went micro four thirds. And this is the S3 Pro. Now, in a lot of ways, this is a very, very similar camera to the S2 Pro. Fortunately, one of the things it does away with is the need for the CR123s. It is powered purely by some double A's, and it quite happily takes rechargeables, which is what I've got in here. Now, I do know that the S5 Pro did eventually move to a lithium-ion battery pack, a rechargeable battery pack, which is, of course, by far and away more common. But looking, you can see, now keep in mind that this is an APS-C sensor size camera. We've got a real beast of a camera here for APS-C size, because it's based on a 35mm body with, and if I turn it side on, it's pretty clear. Even though it's smoothed and integrated, they're certainly integrated a bit better than on the S2 Pro, you can clearly see how we basically got a digital package bolted on and then clad in ABS plastic onto a 35mm body. That's effectively what we got. It does make it an absolute beast of a camera. One of the nice things that they didn't do on the S2, but they did change for the S3, is that it does have a vertical release. Now, annoyingly, the vertical release only has a shutter button on it. You've got no input dials on there, which is a shame, because in your normal landscape view, you've got both a front wheel and a back input wheel, which is really nice. It also, something I like, takes a threaded cable release, which I think too few cameras take threaded cable releases. I quite like them, but I'm a bit old-fashioned like that. The grey hair gives it away. So, what else is there about this camera? Well, given the era of digital cameras it came from, it's actually, as you would expect, fairly basic. You've got your standard PASM, so program, aperture priority, shutter priority, and full manual modes on it. That's about it in terms of modes. You've got multiple exposure, you've got automatic advance, but it is very slow, and you're not getting any video on here. It does have matrix metering on there because it uses Nikon's matrix metering system on there, as well as spot metering and centre weighted. So the metering's actually really good and really accurate. You've got a back D-pad on there, which fortunately has a lock. It does allow you to move between the 5 or so AF points. It was a lot back then, having 5 AF points. It's good for that. But it is very sensitive, and I'm a left eye shooter, and I'm glad that this can be locked, because when you've got it up to your left eye, my nose is right there. So if I forget to lock it, I know fairly quickly, because the AF point moves every time I look through it and press it with my nose. In terms of memory cards, we have actually a dual slot in here, but the dual is just for the purposes of taking 2 memory card formats. So you've got CF cards in there, and you've got XD digital cards. Now, obviously, XD digital cards no longer really used. I do have some for an old Olympus point and shoot I've got that came with a couple of them, but compact flash is what this comes with. Now, one known weakness of these is the compact flash pins are actually directly mounted onto one of the printed circuit boards here, and if you get a bit heavy-handed pushing it in, you can actually damage the PCB, so you do need to be quite careful putting it in there, and it's why a lot of people actually used the USB out rather than taking the memory cards out, which you can do. I'm fairly gentle, so I don't really worry too much about it. It is a fairly well-featured camera. ISO range 100 up to 1600. The 1600 is just about usable. Gives a bit of grain, but it's an interesting grain on there. The real interesting thing about these, the star of these for a lot of people, is the sensor. Now, all of the S Pro models, so 1, 2, 3 and 5, there was never a 4, used Fuji at the time's proprietary Super CCD sensor, which was quite innovative in the way that it was arranged. It was on paper a 6 megapixel sensor, but because of the way it was arranged, it could take data from other sensor patterns around it and interpolate those into a sort of faux 12 megapixel output. Now, you could only get that when you were shooting RAW. You didn't have that if you were shooting JPEG, but it does produce some quite interesting results. And what it also allowed them to do was move where some of the various sensors were positioned, and it gave it a much broader dynamic range than a lot of other sensors available at the time. Now, that was further refined on the S3 over the S2 in this had a updated version of that sensor which had an even broader dynamic range. Now, I'm going to be honest, the dynamic range, it's nowhere near what we're used to by modern sensors. Pretty much anything from 2015 onwards has a wider dynamic range than this. But this also played around with early Fujifilm film simulations. You've only got 3 of them in there, colour slide, colour negative and black and white. But you've got some of them in there. Annoyingly, those, as you imagine, only work with JPEG, and this camera will not shoot a combination of JPEG and RAW. You're either shooting JPEG or you're shooting RAW. You can't mix the two together, which is a bit annoying, and I tend to shoot RAW on it given that it's a 6 megapixel sensor some of the time, because one of the things that you need to be aware of with this, now this is in RAW mode at the moment, and I'm just going to focus, press the shutter, and tell you how long it takes for it to actually write this. So there we go, it's writing, it's writing. Well, actually you can see for yourself, little orange light there is not going to go out until we've finished writing that to the card. And as you can see, it's still going. And there we go, it's off. This makes, and the buffer is tiny in this, by the way. The buffer for RAW is absolutely tiny. So if you want to shoot sequentially, or really you want to shoot within a 30-second window almost of your last shot, you can't shoot RAW. JPEG, the buffer clears fairly quickly and it's reasonably usable. But as a result, given when this camera came out, which was I think around about 2006. One moment, I will double check and pop that on screen if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember it was around about 2006. And this is time, you know, the same time period where things like the EOS 5D, the classic, was coming out. It wrote far faster than the memory card could shoot sequentially in RAW, etc, etc. It really did, for a lot of professional use, embarrass this particular camera. So, why have I still got one, and why do still people bang on about this camera to this day? Well, there was a certain group of photographers that used these over and above everything else, even back in their launch window when they were first made, back in the early 2000s. And this sensor really does produce some interesting results, and it's incredibly accurate on portraiture work. And the images, by modern standards, are slightly soft. I mean, you can get around a lot of that with modern image processing software, denoising, etc. But it takes very flattering pictures of people. So as a result, it was a very popular camera for wedding photographers. Now, with wedding photography, you can shoot JPEG, get away with it, the buffer's not going to slow you down enough, and the rendering off of the sensor of those skin tones and the flattering nature of them made it a really popular camera in that particular genre. And to a degree, also in portraiture photography as well. But that said, that I've used this outside, but this and the S2, outside of those parameters on far more occasions. Now, strictly speaking, shooting sport with this should be an absolute no-no. But you'll see images that I post in this video where I've actually shot motorsport events with this. Now, I wouldn't shoot it professionally with this. It's just a camera I took along and used for motorsport. You've got to shoot it in JPEG. To a degree, you have to pre-focus, but if you're panning, you do that an awful lot with motorsport work anyway. So it is usable. Does it make your life easy? Absolutely not. It really, really doesn't. It is not user-friendly in comparison to taking something like, say, my Nikon D7000, or if I took any of my Micro Four Thirds kit. It's much quicker in terms of focusing. It's much more accurate in terms of focusing. It's got higher shutter speeds. It's got higher ISOs that are usable. You know, they will make my life considerably easier if I'm going along and shooting something fast-moving like motorsport. But is it usable? Yes, I've used it. Is it a camera I would recommend somebody buy today? No, being perfectly honest, I wouldn't unless you've got a real hankering to try that sensor, and the sensor is absolutely lovely, but it's slow, it's big, it's heavy, it's not the finest thing ergonomically. It does take the Nikon mount lenses, which does make lens availability quite good. It's got CF card format, which puts a lot of people off. If it goes wrong, you are not getting spares for it for love nor money, although they do tend to be fairly reliable. So it's a very hard camera for me to recommend that somebody pick up, particularly as a first camera. I mean, it was, not this one, the S2 Pro was my first DSLR, so I kind of have a soft spot for it in that regard, and I do like the way the images render off of it, particularly of people and animals and things like that. The slightly softer edge to it and the way the sensor deals with colours I really like. But it's a hard camera to recommend beyond that when you've got things like the Canon 5D around, which, in all honesty, is not much bulkier than this, even with its drive on. I mean, let me just... I haven't got a lens on it at the moment, but if I... Ooh, it's weightlifting. Hold the two up side by side, you can see that this is bigger with its drive on, but if you take the drive off of a 5D, it's much smaller than this, and it's a better camera, full stop. And it's got a full frame sensor, and you won't be paying, just pop that down, you won't be paying a great deal more for a 5D than you'd pick one of these up for. So is it an interesting camera to shoot? Yes. Does it produce some images which do have a kind of unique sensor feel to them? Yes, I believe so, but it's a hard one for me to recommend in that regard, but it's still one I've got a soft spot for. So there we go. That is the Fujifilm S2 and S3 Pros from a time when Fujifilm cameras were most definitely not cool. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when new content gets uploaded. Thanks very much for watching. Take care. Bye.